time for Q&A at the end. And I'll go ahead and do our introduction. Right, we are joined today by Dr. Amber Wachowski, professor and assistant chair in the Department of Political Science, as well as director of the Marquette Democracy Lab and the Civic Dialogues program. Her research explores the intersections between politics and inequality, including class biases and turnout, money, and electoral campaigns, how public policy affects societal inequalities. She's also an occasional source for media coverage in electoral politics, including CNN, NPR, Fox News, and several local news outlets. Dr. Wachowski has graciously agreed to speak to us about a phenomenal and much needed program, Civic Dialogues, which works to foster productive, considerate deliberation about pressing issues and works to engage voices here at Marquette from across the political spectrum. Dr. Wachowski, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I know a great many of our fundraisers and the staff here in UA are eager to hear more about the Civic Dialogues program, how we are currently utilizing it, what we may and can do in the future. So with that being said, I will turn the floor over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, James. And thank you, everyone, for attending this morning. I have hopefully no more than a 15-minute presentation here to introduce the Civic Dialogues program and talk a little bit about our funding needs. I'm going to begin by setting the stage, talking a little bit about the problem that the Civic Dialogues program is addressing. Charles was speaking to this right as folks were coming in. I'm then going to explain how the Civic Dialogues program is unique in the ways in which it's addressing these very pressing, important problems facing not just us here in the United States, but increasingly around the world as well. And then I'm going to end by talking about some of the opportunities to maybe grow support for the program and to think about how we are also trying to grow the program now that we've concluded the first 2 years of our pilot program. All right, so I'm going to really just show a bunch of images to lay out the problem because I think pictures speak more, than 1,000 words. And so I don't think these images are unfamiliar to anyone here on this call. It seems that the politics in the United States has become extremely divisive, contentious. It seems like we can never even come together to talk about important issues facing the country and the globe. We see images like these. These are, this is an image from a town hall meeting. You saw in really the last decade and a half, the growing sort of anger eruption, people actually being removed from town hall meetings for their disruptions. The pandemic, I think, coming out of the pandemic, debates about schools, school board meetings, these are the sorts of images that are gracing our news screens. I'm going to show my only social science graph here. I promise this is going to be the only bit here. I'm going to go back to pictures in a moment. But I want to explain this figure here. This is a figure which displays the growing affective polarization in the United States. So what do I mean by affective polarization? In public opinion surveys going back decades, the American National Election Study has asked folks to rank on what we call a feeling thermometer, their warmth or their coolness toward their own political party and the warmth or coolness toward those in the other political party. The top line is what we call in-group feeling, and this really hasn't changed much. How people, say, self-identified Republicans feel about the Republican Party, self-identified Dems feeling about the Democratic Party. Instead, what you've seen is that the middle line, which takes a plummet, goes down, and that's the out-group feeling. And you can see really from 2000, this dramatic decline. You take the difference between the two and you get a measure of affective polarization. There is some research, this is the sort of context that gives me pause, that higher education might actually be making this problem worse, not better. So some examples, some detail for this could be what some have called the perception gap, or the tendency for us to overestimate the extremity of our political opponents' views. This sort of perception gap, survey research finds, actually increases with education. The more years of education individuals have, the wider the perception gap, the more their perceptions actually diverge from reality. There's a slight caveat here. The data really suggests that this is especially true for self-identified Democrats. The perception gap is suggestive, but it's not statistically significant among self-identified Republicans with a college degree compared to those with only high school diploma. Another image here. Here's the social media. Lots of evidence now about the ways in which social media kind of is adding to that toxicity in our political discourse. Some of this is just our emotions and which ones are the most likely to go viral. So this is just an image here showing that anger, as demonstrated in these like red sort of spider graphs here, is the most viral emotion on social media. It gets us in that stage. It gets us talking, tweeting at each other, past each other, and in no ways coming together to have kind of reasoned political discourse. Maybe some of you have seen the most recent Surgeon General report about an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. Why might I have this as a picture to show on our screen talking about the Civic Dialogues program? In addition to our social media echo chambers and the way in which it might fuel polarization online, we are seeing in the face-to-face world a sort of decrease in the opportunities for people to come together, to have authentic conversations, to have relationships, connections that bridge differences. And there's all sorts of health and societal ills associated with this growing sort of epidemic of loneliness and social isolation. I bring this up as a background context for the Civic Dialogues program. So I'm going to now shift a little bit to maybe some more optimistic images in talking about the Civic Dialogues program. This quote by jazz musician Wynton Marsalis is my favorite about democracy. And he talks about how jazz is the perfect metaphor for democracy. And he explains, today you go into the modern recording studio with all this technology. The bass plays first, the drums come in, they track the trumpet, the singer comes in, they ship the tape somewhere. Well, none of the musicians have played together. And you can't play jazz that way. In order for you to play jazz, you've got to listen to them, meaning the other musicians. The music forces you at all times to address what other people are thinking, and for you to interact with them with empathy and to deal with the process of working things out. And that's how our music could really teach what the meaning of American democracy is. I love that quote, and it got me thinking a lot about the Civic Dialogues program and what we're trying to build or construct. This is the new Geffen Hall. Why might I have this picture here? Well, musicians will tell you, it's not just your talents, your ability to meet with other musicians and singers, but the background conditions matter too. The building acoustics, which control the sound in the room, while those acoustics matter, they can make it easier to hear. Do they amplify sound? Do they muffle, distort? Can the building acoustics, how do they make sound? The warmth, the richness of the sound, the acoustics also can affect noise disturbances, in some cases, either making it worse or mitigating, such that we can actually hear and listen to one another. So the building that the music is played in, the acoustics, are important. Wrong building, wrong structure, notes interfere, the waves cancel each other out. It's how you get dead spots in theaters. And indeed, this is what's happened with the Geffen Hall. It was the New York Philharmonic Orchestra. It opened in 1962, its first event. Jackie Kennedy, Nelson Rockefeller, so on and so on. They all ascended the escalators to hear this wonderful performance. And as the Philharmonic exploded with the first notes of Beethoven's Gloria, everyone realized that no one could hear one another. The noise was distorted, the music, it was a disaster. And so this is the image of rebuilding Geffen Hall, which opened this past October. So I've been thinking about the Civic Dialogues program as the ways in which we are improving the acoustics here at Marquette University. We are helping students develop their skills, finding their voices, but importantly, finding purpose in playing together, coming together to talk about some of the most important pressing issues facing our country. So this is my depiction. I really need to work with a graphic designer to get a better depiction of it, But what is it that we're doing in the Civic Dialogues program? How are the different, I'm going to mix my metaphors here, so apologies. What are the different puzzle pieces that we're going to put together, if you think the building blocks for our Philharmonic Hall that we're building here at Marquette? When it comes to the Civic Dialogues program, we're interested in improving students' speaking skills. This includes understanding for the role of civility in democracy and political discourse, but also understanding the importance of dissent and how to productively disagree with one another. Our students are developing and practicing active and deep listening skills. It involves reflection and it involves uptake, not just sitting back passively, but communicating and demonstrating to someone else that you've actually heard them. We are a university. We care deeply about our students' critical thinking skills. And if we think about critical thinking, it's really about how do we know what to think? And critical thinking means that we need to be able to evaluate evidence and argument. We need to be reflecting on values and normative considerations, excuse me. It's the ability for students to see problems from different perspectives, being able to break down a problem into constituent elements to gain a better understanding of the issue at hand. I'm a political scientist. I care deeply about democracy, and I'm very worried about the state of democracy. And it's a fear, a concern that I think is shared across the political spectrum. And so our students are reflecting on democracy. Democracy does involve conflict. We live in a pluralistic society. There are going to be differences. Sometimes by coming together and talking across those differences, we find consensus. Other times we just clarify where those lines of conflict are and recognize that we have to use other tools in our democratic toolkit to address them or to come to some sort of agreement or decision, say voting. So the Civic Dialogues program is centered around one simple question. What should we do? It's the question that all citizens in all times, all places ask. What speaks to the evidence, the facts that we're confronting? Should are the values that we bring to the discussion. It's not what should I do. We're not talking about personal ethics. We're talking about how we live together in a shared world, in a shared community, and it requires we, not I. And then do. How do we reflect and act? So we might say, what should we do about climate change, about AI and privacy, about migration and borders, immigration policy? Thinking about coming out of the pandemic, how do we balance individual rights with public health? What should we do? So this is what we do. We've got this framing question, and the program has several pieces. The first I'm going to talk about is our dialogue dinners. This is an innovative approach. There are programs around the country that sponsor kind of events that bring people together, but we do this with intention in small group settings with facilitators that have been trained. We also provide food. So our dialogue dinners, students who sign up complete a short survey where on whatever topic we're talking about, the students are giving us a sense of where they stand on the political spectrum. We then use those data to assign students deliberately to a small group where we ensure that there's viewpoint diversity. We have observed at Marquette, and I hear from colleagues around the country, that we oftentimes have events, but it's like-minded people coming to hear from their like-minded speakers or like-minded peers. The Civic Dialogues program is all about bringing people together across lines of difference. Students then will talk in a facilitated way about a particular topic. We do a reflection afterwards. We also survey students after their dialogue dinner, just kind of taking the pulse to try to understand, as I'll say in a moment here in a future slide, what difference are these conversations having? And we're finding some exciting, but also in some sense, surprising results. Second piece, speaker series. Students today coming to college campuses have fewer examples of kind of people out in the world providing good, healthy examples of productive disagreement. Instead, they're seeing shouting heads on TV screens. They're seeing the sort of town hall meetings, school board meetings just erupting into chaos, disruption. If you think about social media, that's not a good model for productive engagement with difference. And so with intention, we bring speakers to campus to talk about issues, whether we're talking about on all the right, we had Betsy Stevenson, who was in the Obama administration on campus, Michael Stevenson, a Marquette alum at the Conservative American Enterprise Institute. They were on campus talking about economic opportunity and inequality, inflation. We were at this point in the pandemic coming at a time in which inflation was rising, and there was debates about what the government's response was, and was it causing more harm than good for the US economy. In the center, it's kind of hard to see, but that's Rich Lowry, who came to campus in a fantastic event. He's the editor-in-chief of the National Review, like one of the most prominent conservative thought leaders in the country. I can maybe speak to a little of the efforts that event kind of sparked. And it's kind of an ongoing chain of events that students have worked to create that I'm really excited about. It's kind of sparked their interest and their curiosity. And all the way on the left, we have a panel talking here more locally about the role of local news media and the ways in which local newspapers might actually be helping or harming political discourse in the country. So these speakers come from across the political spectrum. They're modeling productive engagement, and importantly, they're drawing students from across campus and across the political spectrum as well. Okay, here's just some student testimonials, some of the big pieces. Students are telling us, quote, "I think my biggest takeaway was to always ask questions and to go into discussions, wanting to understand people rather than to change minds." Another student told us, "I really appreciate the work you're doing with civic dialogues. I'm really impressed. Not only are the topics very interesting, but the speakers you're able to bring in are fascinating. I really enjoy these events." And I want to come back to that point about enjoyment, the joy that our students are finding in the program. And I think they're important to our community. All right, 360% increase. It's a big number. We launched this program in the fall of 2021. And since then, in our 2 short years, attendance between our first year and our second year exploded. It grew over 360%. In our first year, we had just over 140 participants. This year, we were at 645. Our attendance, to put it another way, are drawing over 3.5 times more participants in the second year. We were finding building momentum. And a big reason why is that students are not finding these experiences scary, but they're excited. Okay, I know I'm running short on time here, so let me just tell you that we are measuring our program impact. This is something that maybe prospective donors would be interested in. They want to know, in a way, what their return on investment is. Students are finding that they are talking about aspects of issues they hadn't considered before. It's improving their understanding. They feel comfortable engaging with difference. Their tolerance for disagreement is going up. And importantly, we're finding that those dialogue dinners are reducing affective polarization on our college campus. New for this coming year is getting into the curriculum. So I'm working with our director of the honors program to pilot test a new first-year seminar where we are integrating the Civic Dialogues program into the classroom. We will have 72 students. We have hired peer facilitators. We structured the class to explore 3 different issues across the course of the semester, and we're teaching students and giving them opportunities to practice dialogue, deliberation, and debate. They'll do that on the first issue and then rinse and repeat as they're kind of building confidence. The very bottom it's blurry here on my screen. This was from a first-year student responding to a study that was done by Gallup and Knight. And this student was saying, "I feel like it needs to be freedom of expression, needs to be more emphasized on college campuses. Students are reporting that they feel unprepared for classroom discussion coming to college. We've got evidence from K-12 schools that we're just not doing enough of it. And students are not prepared. The pandemic, virtual learning, it didn't help. And so I think it's really important for us to get in the classroom." So what could funding support? Funding supports our speakers. That involves their travel, their speaker fees, live streaming our events so that our alumni and others can watch. We want speakers, again, who can model productive disagreement, who engage our big questions, and importantly, can draw interest here on campus and beyond. Funding supports the dialogue dinners. These aren't high ticket items, but we do provide food to students. Food is just a great way to build community. We also pay and train student facilitators to just make sure that no one's dominating the conversation and that we are kind of sticking to our ground rules. We're building community, we're developing civic relationships, and students are practicing their civic skills. This stuff takes practice. I talked about the curriculum. Funding will support in-class peer facilitators, faculty training. Amelia Zerker and I will be working with our assessment director this fall to try to understand and really evaluate the curriculum that we're developing. And the idea is that we can scale it up and scale it out. We know first year seminars are a high impact teaching practice, but they take investment. Finally, research. I am a social scientist. I am really interested in trying to understand what difference these kind of interventions make. I want Marquette to be a national model. I would imagine that there would be opportunities for us to host conferences and to really develop a brand here for the program. With that, I did run long and I apologize. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to stop sharing and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.